A Pound of Yellow Flesh by John Robertson. I remember the first time I threw a customer out of my Wan Chai restaurant for being too squeamish. The customer was a Westerner who felt his order of the pig's head looked too much like a pig's head. "Where I come from, that's weird," he said. "Could you maybe remove this snout?" The ignorant bigot. He was British, as far as I could tell. "The nose-to-tail concept, sir, is one of the hottest dining trends sweeping the Western world right now," I explained. He was silent. Him and his female companion seemed disturbed by the fact that I still had my cleaver from the kitchen. I continued, "Using every part of the animal, we pride ourselves on never expelling a single piece of flesh from this restaurant. However, if you insist on questioning our judgment, I'll have to make an exception in the case of your sickly self." I pointed the cleaver at him. Yes, it was embarrassing for them as they shuffled out, but this uncultured swine of a man had deeply offended me. He had insulted not just my trade, but some of my strongest beliefs at the time. I've always loathed the use of terms like pork, beef, and mutton to avoid talking about the animals that we eat. I think there's something genuinely cowardly about distancing oneself from the realities of the flesh. Of course, this all has roots in my old problematic relationship with my own flesh. You see, my Hong Kong Chinese family moved to a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, when I was 8. This made me a late starter at learning to be American, which I duly suffered for at the hands of my classmates, including the ABCs. As a result, I had a burning desire to shed my own skin on more than one occasion. I sought refuge in the whitest of fashions and hobbies. Then, most interested in cooking, I took up a branch of it that was deeply rooted in Western history: nose-to-tail cuisine. But while later pursuing this passion at the Culinary Institute of America, I began to feel predictable stirrings in me towards my shunned birthplace. By the time I graduated, I found it shameful that, while I may have become fluent in the anatomies of many obscure animals, I'd all but forgotten how to order Chinese dishes that didn't include the name General Tso. Eventually, the stirrings inside me grew, and it wasn't long before I made a snap decision to move to Hong Kong. Thus was born, with the help of some friendly investors, my restaurant, the Offal Mess, Offal, in Wan Chai. Those were some of my happiest days. I lived in an apartment along Wan Chai Street Market, and there was something invigorating about waking up daily to the most local of local sights: fresh pigs' trotters, snouts tripe, and bags of blood. It inspired true thankfulness for nature's gifts. For a while, at least. Until the morning that turned nature and her gifts on their head for me. I was walking to work as usual, passing the shops and stalls, when suddenly, behind a glass storefront, I saw it. A leg. Not just any leg, but an unmistakably human leg, with foot and toenails still attached. It was slender and hairless, and most of all, stiff. Stiff with death as it hung there for God only knows what, or whom. I then noticed that it wasn't just unmistakably human, it was also unmistakably Chinese. Whether by the color or the distinct morphology, I somehow knew that I was face to face with my own flesh in a much more palpable way than I'd ever longed for before. But that lasted just a few seconds before I vomited into the street gutter. After I eventually managed to get myself out of the market, it took an hour or so to gather what I could of my wits in a park on Cross Lane. I had no idea why I'd just seen what I had, but I told myself to banish it from my mind. I lasted a couple of weeks like almost nothing had happened, avoiding the butcher shop but otherwise carrying on as normal. Eventually, though, like a visible phantom limb, the hideous leg crept back into my mind's eye. Soon it was there round the clock, making me retch during tasks like preparing the day's stock and rendering the fat. Moving out of my Market Street apartment didn't help. Eventually my problems became more obvious, and the investors in the awful mess had me resign and forfeit my shares. I was bitter, but not at them. For I knew where the rightful target of that bitterness lay, and I knew that I had to face it, along with my fears. When I arrived at the butcher shop, there were no primate limbs hanging in the storefront window, only pigs, calves, Peking duck, and rib sections. Inside, I found a scrawny old man, shirtless and with a cigarette dangling from his mouth, chopping meat. "Where's the leg?" I demanded. "Leg?" he asked, appearing confused. "The human leg, damn it!" "Me, human leg, he shot back. "The Chinese leg," I said. The goddamn yellow leg. Where is it? Come on. I'll order some. I want a pound of yellow flesh, you bastard! A pound of yellow flesh! He spat his cigarette out. "You lay out, taxi!" He shouted at me with eyes of hate. Then he leveled his cleaver at my neck. "Han hot!" I left the store, shaken. I used to pretend that such folk were my brethren in the fine tradition of artisanal meat preparation. But I'd just seen that this man cared nothing for artisanship. Flakes of ash from his cigarette had lain among the meat he was chopping. I then began to consider that perhaps I'd romanticize more than just local customs and crafts like his. Perhaps, like many in ABC who'd once felt themselves uncomfortable in their own skin, I'd now come to romanticize that skin itself in ways that made me gloss over certain harsh realities. I'd read about cannibalism as practiced by both primitive tribes and individual psychopaths. At the heart of it lies a belief that when one ingests someone's flesh, one also ingests their essence. Now, part of me wished that that was true. I mean, the members of my own tribe could have eaten that leg, repelled me. But I might have easily done the same if it could merge me with the leg's Chinese essence, thus unlocking the mysteries of my own people to me and freeing me from my trauma. But my Western conscience naturally pulled me back to my senses, and instead made me more resolved to get to the bottom of the matter. I was back at the shop just a week later. By the time I got there, I was screaming and trembling. "Come on, let me order some! A pound of yellow flesh! A pound of yellow flesh!" I thumped my fists on the chopping board and grabbed him by the arm. In my rage, I hadn't noticed the customer in a policeman's uniform. Quickly restrained, I ended up at the Colonial Station on Gloucester Road. Yeah, they could have charged me with assault if they wanted to, but they opted simply for mandatory counseling sessions. And to be fair, I found these helpful overall. At least until the day that I ventured back down the Wan Chai Street Market. My aim this time was to overcome my fears and anger. My therapist said that the key was to let go of being judgmental. Even if I went and saw the leg, she said, and she seemed more than doubtful that I actually would, it needn't bother me at all. I agreed. But when I arrived at the storefront, I felt myself go white. In the window, hanging there in all its hairlessness, was that same hideous leg that I'd seen before. My heart pounded, but I held it together. And then suddenly, the foot of the leg just twitched. I jumped back, then I stepped closer. I saw that the leg wasn't hanging on any visible hook, but went up behind the wall, out of the window. I ran inside the shop. Looking up, I saw the leg connected to its owner. The old scrawny butcher in goddamn boxer shorts. He was standing on his other foot, which tiptoed on the table. From outside view, it was hidden. The upper half of his body had been hidden too as he rummaged through styrofoam boxes on the wall's top shelf. Suddenly, for the first time in my life, I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. The old codger gasped with horror as I grabbed his leg and then seized the cleaver on his table and cried out, "A pound of yellow flesh, you bastard!" Just a pound of yellow flesh.